The Africa Climate Summit was a moment in time, if I may say that. It was the first time, at least as far as I know, or I can remember, where Africa was coming to the table and saying we want to be a part of the conversation on climate.
It presented an opportunity for people who have, the countries that have taken actionable steps to compare notes and also share learnings from the solutions, the innovative solutions that they've implemented.
And so that's really what the Africa Climate Summit was an opportunity to do, is to bring all of these different actors together, bring them in a coordinated way, and to demonstrate that really Africans do have the answers, they are the solution, and that they're already enacting these solutions.
So the Africa Youth Climate Assembly, or ACAP, was a 3-day pre-event for the Africa Climate Summit.
The Africa Climate Summit was a moment in time, if I may say that. It was the first time, at least as far as I know, or I can remember, where Africa was coming to the table and saying we want to be a part of the conversation on climate, in a sense, in our own terms. The reason I say that is, in the past, we've been involved in climate conversations, but usually it's always been from a victim perspective, where Africa is suffering, we need help. This was the first time we were coming together as a continent and saying we want to provide solutions. We understand climate is a problem, we need to discuss it, but we also need to discuss it from an African perspective. And so it was this aggregation of different countries coming in, discussing climate change at their own terms, also saying what are the opportunities, what are the problems, how do we solve them, how do we involve the outside world, how do we get the global north and other actors to come into the conversation, but very much so on our terms as Africans rather than the other way around, where it's always been us going out there and saying this is what we need. Some key of course, there were significant outcomes when you look at the Nairobi Declaration document. But for me, I think some of the key outcomes was just this buttressing on the just energy transition, which is what are the resources that Africa has? How do we drive towards green industrialization, but at the same time in a way that is just and fair? The reason why that's important is you have different countries that are at different levels. So you have countries like Kenya that are 93% green in their energy. So you're not necessarily looking for a transition in that case. What you're looking for is how do we unlock more energy to be developed in this country for a green industry. Where else you have other countries that are either still using fossil fuels, or fossil fuels is a big part of their economic of the economy. And so we need to be a little bit more deliberate about how do we have those countries transition in a way that allows them to develop, allows them to utilize their resources right now to build a better future for their population, but yet still keeping the larger goal at we're trying to become green, we're trying to get to the place where as a continent we remain a net zero contributor, or we remain we don't become a greater contributor to the climate change problem.
So the Africa Youth Climate Assembly, or ACAP, was a 3-day pre-event for the Africa Climate Summit. There were so many goals that were meant for ACAP, but what was the most interesting bit was that it was the entry point, or the way that we could bring out the climate crisis to young people, getting them to understand what is happening and their role and how they can be part of it. I think the biggest role that ACAP was playing was to enable young people get together and give them a voice, give them a platform, and basically enlighten them on what's happening, because most of these negotiations happen behind closed room doors, boardrooms, and so on, and young people never get to have the chance to know what happens there. Yet they're the ones who get affected. So ACAP was like mostly a platform to get young people onto the summit. But the reason behind setting up ACAP was having the youth declaration that the young people wanted to present to the heads of states, so that they can get their voice into the Nairobi Declaration that was then a part of the Africa Climate Summit.
The Africa Climate Summit that held in Nairobi in 2023 was the fulfillment of a call from previous years for African countries, African member states, to hold such a summit. Was delayed a bit, but then eventually held last year. So the summit was very important in that it gave African countries an opportunity to present a united front as COP28 was approaching. There was also a unification of African voices, and it presented an opportunity for people who have, the countries that have taken actionable steps to compare notes and also share learnings from the solutions, the innovative solutions that they've implemented.
So the thing about climate change is that it is a wicked problem. It's a problem that requires many different people to sit on a table and come to a mutually sort of conclusive decision. And that's something that's evaded the climate movement for a very long time. People cannot seem to come and all come to the same decision at the same time. And because of that, you know, we have been through iterations and iterations from when the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change came to be. We've gone through different iterations of people coming together to come and try and find common ground to what is increasingly becoming a bigger, a wider challenge for the economy, for the communities, which is climate change. So how do we make a decision around this? I think this was a very unique opportunity for Africans to come together and actually be a part of this conversation, to drive this conversation, and to almost set the agenda for how Africans want to be viewed in this entire conversation. For a very long time, Africans and the climate crisis has been seen in the context of Africa being a problem. How do we solve this problem? And this was really an opportunity for African governments, African academicians, African CSOs and youth and all of these different players in this space to come up and say, actually, we are the solution. We are already enacting and driving all of these different projects that are showing themselves to be a solution. And so really the Africa Climate Summit was an opportunity to bring all of these stakeholders together. First of all, just to see, how are you being a solution? How are you driving the answers that we need to this problem? But also, how can we have a more coordinated voice? And unfortunately, that tends to be the problem, right? You have many different people saying different things and not really sort of coming together to see how do we have a stronger voice by just coordinating our interventions and our activities. And so that's really what the Africa Climate Summit was an opportunity to do, is to bring all of these different actors together, bring them in a coordinated way, and to demonstrate that really Africans do have the answers, they are the solution, and that they're already enacting these solutions.